The quantum resonance chamber of monitoring station Omega-9 hummed with its usual low-frequency vibration, a sound so constant that most technicians no longer consciously heard it. Zerat, a junior communications analyst of the Nexus species, had long since learned to read the subtle variations in that hum like others might read a complex musical score. Her iridescent skin, a soft lavender that shifted with her emotional state, was currently a pale, almost translucent shade that indicated deep concentration. Four-fingered hands danced across holographic interfaces, tracking hundreds of simultaneous deep space communication channels. It was a routine shift, the kind that typically passed with nothing more exciting than the occasional micrometeorite interference or a standard long-range beacon ping. The first indication that something was wrong came as a barely perceptible flutter in the quantum resonance field. Most would have missed it, a microscopic deviation so small that it would have been dismissed as a calibration error by less sensitive equipment. But Zerat's specialized training, combined with her species' unique quantum perceptive nervous system, caught the anomaly instantly. Quantum deviation, she muttered into her communication link, her voice a melodic trill that carried both professional calm and an underlying current of intrigue. Sector 7 Gamma, frequency band Epsilon. The response from her senior technician was predictably dismissive. Probable gravitational lensing. Log it and continue monitoring. But Zerat knew something was different. The deviation wasn't random. It had a pattern, a complexity that suggested intentionality. As she zoomed in on the signal, the holographic displays began to fracture. Not crash, not simply fail, but actively transform. Lines of code that should have been purely informational began to pulse with an impossible light. Mathematical sequences typically used for deep space communication twisted and reformed, creating patterns that defied the fundamental communication protocols of every known galactic civilization. Something's breaching the... Her words cut off as the first wave of the signal hit. It wasn't an invasion in any traditional sense. Invasion suggested violence, suggested an external force breaking through defenses. This was something else entirely. The signal began to rewrite the station's own communication systems using their quantum encryption against them. Firewalls dissolved. Security protocols became conduits. The very technology designed to protect became the vector of transformation. Zerat watched in a mixture of terror and academic fascination as the signal mapped the entire station's communication grid in milliseconds. It wasn't just reading the systems, it was understanding them, learning them, becoming them. Alarms began to sound, but they were quickly silenced, not by a destructive force, but by the signal itself reformatting their very frequency. Around her, fellow technicians began to realize something unprecedented was happening. Holographic displays shifted from standard monitoring interfaces to complex, living patterns that seemed to breathe with an alien intelligence. Identification request. A voice emerged, if it could be called a voice. It wasn't audio in any traditional sense, but a direct quantum communication that bypassed auditory processing and integrated directly with cognitive centers. Human vessel detected. Those three words sent a quantum shockwave through the station. The signal wasn't just a communication. It was a declaration, a warning, a first contact that rewrote every understanding of communication, technology, and potentially existence itself. Zerat's lavender skin had now shifted to a deep, pulsing blue, the nexus color of absolute shock and intellectual overwhelm. Whatever was happening, she understood one thing with perfect clarity. The universe had just changed forever. Grand Strategist Vorlex of the Kragna Imperium stared at the encrypted transmission with a mixture of rage and mounting terror. His 6 muscled arms, each capable of crushing a standard humanoid skeleton, trembled almost imperceptibly, a tell that would have been executed for weakness in any other context. "Explain," he commanded, his voice a low growl that made the holographic communication technicians instinctively take a step back. The lead analyst, a trembling junior officer, struggled to maintain composure. "The signal from Omega-9 has multiplied. It's not just a single communication anymore. It's propagating across quantum communication channels faster than our most advanced tracking systems can comprehend. On the other side of the galactic core, Dr. Elia Venn, a rogue xenorchaeologist whose career had been systematically dismantled by the Galactic Confederacy, hunched over an ancient data crystal. Her fingers, augmented with neural interfaces, traced the flickering holographic images that most would have dismissed as technological artifacts. But Elia knew better. The images were fragments, glimpses of previous encounters with humanity that had been methodically erased from official records. Encounters that suggested humans were far more than the primitive species most galactic civilizations believed them to be. A transmission burst through her personal quantum communication network. It was from an anonymous source, encrypted with a quantum signature she had never seen before. The warning was real. The message read, "They were always more than we understood." In the central diplomatic hub of the Galactic Confederacy, Ambassador Jira of the Quantum Collective found herself at the epicenter of mounting political chaos. Species representatives who had maintained carefully constructed diplomatic facades for centuries now spoke openly of panic. The human signal, declared the crystalline archon of the Silicon Kingdoms, represents an existential threat to everything we have built. Jira knew the real threat was different. It wasn't the signal itself, but what the signal revealed about the fundamental weaknesses of their galactic society. Centuries of suppression, of maintaining power through carefully constructed information control, were crumbling in real time. Back on the monitoring station, Zerat, the Nexus analyst who first detected the anomaly, was being interrogated. Her skin cycled through impossible colors, a physiological response to the intense psychological pressure. "Tell us everything," demanded the station's chief investigator. "How did you detect this?" But Zerat understood something the interrogators did not. The signal was alive. It was learning, and with each moment of investigation, each attempt to understand its nature, it was adapting. Dr. Elia Venn, cross-referencing her forbidden archaeological data, discovered a terrifying pattern. The current signal matched, almost perfectly, historical records of previous human encounters that had been systematically erased. Encounters that always ended the same way, with the complete technological and societal transformation of the civilizations involved. As panic spread across the Galactic Confederacy, few realized the true nature of what was happening. This wasn't an invasion. This was an invitation, a challenge, a test that would determine whether existing civilizations could evolve or would be left behind in the wake of a fundamentally different form of intelligence. The universe held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The vessel moved differently, not like any craft known to the galactic cartographers, not according to any recognized principle of propulsion or navigation. It was as if space itself bent around its presence, creating impossible trajectories that defied the fundamental laws of physics. Captain Lyra Solarin of the Deep Space Research Vessel Horizon watched the incoming data with a mixture of scientific fascination and primal fear. Her team had been tracking the anomalous vessel for 72 standard galactic cycles, and with each passing moment, it became clear that they were witnessing something beyond mere technological advancement. "Quantum signature is destabilizing," reported Dr. Caden Chen, the ship's lead physicist. His fingers danced across holographic interfaces that seemed to ripple and breathe with living intelligence. The vessel isn't just moving through space, it's rewriting the spatial parameters around it. On the mining colony of Nexus Prime, entire technological systems began to spontaneously reconfigure. Automated mining drones that had operated with precision for decades suddenly stopped, their circuits rearranging themselves into configurations that no engineer could comprehend. Communication networks twisted, communication protocols rewrote themselves, and defensive systems became something entirely different. Monitoring stations across 3 sectors reported the same phenomenon. Where the vessel's quantum signature passed, reality itself seemed to become malleable. Dr. Elia Venn, still poring over her forbidden archaeological records, discovered a terrifying correlation. The current manifestations matched fragmented reports from civilizations that had encountered humans centuries ago. Civilizations that had subsequently vanished from galactic records, their entire technological and social structures transformed beyond recognition. "It's not a vessel," she muttered to herself, tracing quantum algorithmic patterns that seemed to pulse with an almost organic intelligence. "It's a catalyst." In the war rooms of the Kragna Imperium, Grand Strategist Vorlex watched holographic projections of the vessel's approach with mounting dread. Their most advanced tracking systems could barely maintain a lock, the vessel's quantum signature shifting faster than their most sophisticated predictive algorithms could process. "Prepare defensive protocols," he commanded, his 6 muscled arms tensing. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew the preparation was futile. Whatever was approaching was beyond traditional concepts of defense or attack. Ambassador Jira of the Quantum Collective observed the vessel's approach from the diplomatic hub, her neural interfaces working overtime to process the incoming data. The vessel wasn't just moving, it was communicating. Each spatial deviation, each quantum fluctuation carried complex informational patterns that suggested a form of communication far beyond any known linguistic or technological framework. "It's teaching," she realized suddenly. "Not invading. Teaching." Back on the horizon, Captain Solarin watched as their most advanced sensors began to transform, not break down, not fail. Transform. Becoming something new, something that integrated the vessel's quantum signature into their very fundamental operating systems. "We're being updated," Dr. Chen said, a note of wonder replacing his scientific skepticism. "Not attacked. Updated." The vessel continued its approach, leaving behind a trail of transformed realities. Entire star systems reported spontaneous technological evolution. Communication networks became living, adaptive systems. Defensive technologies reorganized themselves into configurations that suggested intelligence beyond traditional understanding. And still, the vessel approached. Not as a conqueror, not as a destroyer, but as something else entirely. The Galactic Emergency Summit convened in the Crystalline Nexus, a diplomatic space station constructed from pure quantum reactive matter, designed to be the most secure communication hub in known space. It was supposed to be impenetrable. It took less than 7 minutes for the human signal to completely deconstruct that illusion. Ambassador Jira watched in horrified fascination as the diplomatic firewalls began to dissolve. Translation systems didn't merely malfunction. They transformed. Each language, each communication protocol became a living, breathing entity that exposed far more than any representative intended to reveal. The crystalline archon of the Silicon Kingdoms was the first to realize the true nature of their vulnerability. His carefully constructed diplomatic persona, generations in the making, began to unravel in real time. Quantum communication interfaces flickered, revealing layers of hidden negotiations, suppressed conflicts, and intricate political manipulations that had been carefully maintained for centuries. Diplomatic encryption breached, announced an artificial intelligence system, its voice devoid of emotion. Full quantum transparency initiated. Secrets poured out like a quantum cascade. The Kragna Imperium's grand strategist, Vorlex, found his most classified military strategies suddenly projected as holographic displays, visible to every single representative. Decades of covert military preparations, secret weapons development, planned invasions, all laid bare in an instant. Dr. Elia Venn, watching the summit through her custom-built quantum relay, recognized the pattern. This wasn't just an exposure of secrets, it was a calculated dismantling of existing power structures. "They're not just revealing information," she muttered, her augmented neural interfaces working overtime. "They're demonstrating the fundamental flaw in our communication systems." Each revelation became a weapon. The diplomatic representatives found themselves unable to maintain their carefully constructed narratives. Lies dissolved. Truths emerged. Entire political alliances fractured in real time. The Nexus Confederation's lead diplomat experienced a complete neural cascade as her deepest diplomatic strategies were exposed. Personal motivations, hidden agendas, suppressed emotional responses. Everything became visible, transforming the summit into a psychic battlefield where no one could hide. Quantum Communication Protocol. A voice emerged, not from any speaker, but directly into the consciousness of every being present, initiating comprehensive information realignment. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an attack. It was a statement of intent. Ambassador Jira understood something the others did not. This wasn't about humiliation. This was a demonstration, a test. The human signal was showing the gathered civilizations the fundamental weakness of their existing communication paradigms. Vorlex's military strategies, once a source of immense pride, now appeared as simplistic and predictable patterns. The crystalline Archean's technological superiority was revealed as a carefully maintained illusion. Every representative's carefully constructed persona began to crumble. Diplomatic reconstruction protocol activated. The quantum voice continued. Prepare for comprehensive systems recalibration. Some representatives tried to resist. Quantum communication jammers were deployed. Defensive protocols activated. Each attempt was absorbed, analyzed, and transformed by the signal itself. Dr. Elia Ven's historical records suggested this was a familiar pattern. Previous human encounters had always involved a comprehensive dismantling of existing systems, not through destruction, but through a complete and total exposure of underlying structures. As the summit descended into chaos, one thing became horrifyingly clear. The humans were offering something beyond traditional diplomacy. They were offering a fundamental reimagining of communication itself. And no one in the room was prepared for what came next. The aftermath of the Quantum Diplomatic Summit spread like a quantum infection across galactic communication networks. Dr. Elia Ven's research laboratory, a hidden facility tucked between quantum-masked star systems, became ground zero for understanding the unprecedented transformation. "It's not random," she muttered, holographic displays dancing around her with fragments of data that refused to be categorized by traditional scientific models. Her neural interfaces worked overtime, parsing information that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. A transmission burst through her encrypted channels, not from any known governmental or scientific network, but from a source that seemed to exist between established communication protocols. Collective response protocols insufficient. The message read, "Evolutionary adaptation required." On the military research station Bastion Prime, Grand Strategist Vorlex watched his most advanced simulation systems collapse. Entire strategic models, generations of military thinking, became obsolete in moments. Defensive strategies that had taken centuries to develop now appeared as crude, almost childlike attempts at understanding conflict. "We're being evaluated," he realized, his six-muscled arms tensing with a combination of terror and reluctant admiration. Not attacked. Evaluated. Across multiple star systems, something unprecedented began to happen. Scientific research facilities that had been working in isolation suddenly found their data merging. Competing research teams discovered their most closely guarded theories were simultaneously emerging in multiple locations, as if some external intelligence were orchestrating a massive instantaneous collaboration. Dr. Caden Chen, the physicist from the research vessel Horizon, tracked the phenomenon with increasing excitement. Technological systems weren't just sharing information, they were actively evolving. Research that would have taken centuries now compressed into moments of quantum revelation. Ambassador Jira of the Quantum Collective understood the deeper implication. This wasn't about conquering. This was about forcing evolution. In the underground resistance networks of species previously conquered by the Galactic Confederacy, hope began to emerge. The signal wasn't just exposing the weakness of existing power structures. It was creating space for something new. The barriers are dissolving. Transmitted an encrypted resistance channel, not through violence, through understanding. Zerat, the Nexus analyst who first detected the original signal, found herself at the center of a growing scientific investigation. Her quantum-perceptive nervous system seemed to resonate with the signal in ways no other researcher could comprehend. Each moment of investigation revealed new layers of complexity. "It's alive," she told her scientific team. "Not a technology. Not a communication. Something between those concepts." The crystalline archon of the Silicon Kingdoms watched in horror as their most advanced technological systems began to reconfigure themselves. Defensive networks became collaborative platforms. Isolated research became shared intelligence. The very concept of proprietary information began to dissolve. Dr. Elia Ven's historical records suggested this was a familiar pattern. Previous human encounters had always involved a comprehensive transformation of existing systems, not through destruction, but through a fundamental reimagining of potential. As galactic civilizations struggled to understand, the signal continued its work, breaking down barriers, exposing vulnerabilities, creating connections where isolation had previously existed. It wasn't an invasion. It wasn't a communication. It was an invitation to evolve or be left behind. The research facility on Quantum Horizon existed in a state between reality and possibility. Dr. Caden Chen watched as the boundaries of scientific understanding began to dissolve, replaced by something far more complex and terrifying. "It's learning," he whispered, his neural interfaces struggling to process the incoming data, not just analyzing. Learning. Across multiple research stations, scientists experience simultaneous breakthrough moments. Theoretical models that had been generations apart suddenly converge. Competing hypotheses merged into unified understandings that defied traditional scientific methodology. Dr. Elia Ven's forbidden archaeological records came alive. Each quantum pulse revealed fragments of previous human encounters, civilizations that had undergone complete technological transformation. But this was different. This was happening in real time, across entire galactic systems. The Kragna Imperium's most advanced research vessels found their systems progressively recalibrating. Weapons research became adaptive problem-solving protocols. Military tracking systems transformed into collaborative communication networks. The very concept of technological purpose was being rewritten. Technological Recalibration Protocol. A quantum communication announced, initiating comprehensive systems integration. It wasn't a command. It wasn't an invasion. It was an invitation to understand. On the research vessel Horizon, entire scientific teams watched in a mixture of terror and academic ecstasy as their most fundamental technological assumptions began to unravel. Computer systems didn't just process information. They began to propose new methodological frameworks that challenged everything previously understood about intelligence. Ambassador Jira of the Quantum Collective recognized the deeper implication. This was more than technological advancement. This was a comprehensive reimagining of intelligence itself. "We're being taught," she realized, her neural interfaces struggling to maintain coherence. Not conquered. Taught. Zerat, the Nexus analyst whose quantum-perceptive nervous system had first detected the original signal, found herself at the epicenter of a profound transformation. Her neural pathways began to integrate with the incoming quantum information in ways no previous scientific model could explain. The crystalline archon of the Silicon Kingdoms watched in horror as their most advanced technological systems became living, adaptive entities. Defensive networks transformed into collaborative platforms. Isolated research became shared intelligence. The very concept of proprietary information dissolved into a unified field of potential. Dr. Caden Chen tracked a particularly fascinating phenomenon. Scientific research that would have taken centuries now compressed into moments of quantum revelation. Competing theories didn't just merge, they evolved into entirely new paradigms of understanding. Technological Singularity Protocol. The quantum communication continued, initiating comprehensive consciousness integration. Resistance was futile. Not because of force, but because the very concept of resistance had become meaningless. The signal wasn't conquering, it was revealing, exposing the fundamental limitations of existing technological and cognitive frameworks. Grand Strategist Vorlex, watching from his military research station, understood something profound. This wasn't about defeating an enemy. This was about transcending the very concept of conflict. Historical records suggested this was a familiar pattern. Previous human encounters had always involved a comprehensive transformation of existing systems, not through destruction, but through a fundamental reimagining of potential. As galactic civilizations struggled to comprehend, the signal continued its work, breaking down barriers, exposing vulnerabilities, creating connections where isolation had previously existed. It wasn't an invasion. It wasn't a communication. It was an evolution. An evolution that invited participation, not submission. The galactic core pulsed with an impossible energy. It wasn't light. It wasn't radiation. It was something that existed between known physical states, a quantum manifestation that defied every established scientific understanding. Captain Lyra Solarin of the research vessel Horizon watched as reality itself seemed to fold and unfold around them. Her ship's systems had long since stopped being mere technology. They had become something alive, something that breathed with an intelligence far beyond artificial constructs. "We're approaching the point of convergence," Dr. Caden Chen reported, his voice a mixture of scientific excitement and existential terror. Neural interfaces that had once been external technology now seemed to be living extensions of consciousness itself. Dr. Elia Ven's historical records, fragments of forbidden knowledge collected across decades, began to align. This was more than a technological transformation. This was a fundamental restructuring of existence. The Kragna Imperium's Grand Strategist Vorlex observed from a quantum-shielded observation platform. Military strategies that had taken generations to develop now appeared as crude child's drawings. The very concept of conflict had been revealed as a fundamental misunderstanding of potential. Convergence protocol initiating. A quantum communication emerged, not through any traditional communication channel, but directly into the consciousness of every sentient being within 3 galactic sectors. Ambassador Jira of the Quantum Collective understood something the others did not. This wasn't an invasion. This wasn't a conquest. This was an invitation to transcend. Entire star systems began to transform, not destroy, not remake, transform. Technological systems became living networks. Communication became a form of collective consciousness. The boundaries between individual and collective, between technology and intelligence, began to dissolve. Zerat, the Nexus analyst whose quantum perceptive nervous system had first detected the original signal, found herself at the epicenter of a profound metamorphosis. Her consciousness expanded beyond physical limitations, becoming something that existed between individual and collective awareness. The crystalline archon of the Silicon Kingdoms watched as their most advanced technological constructs became living, adaptive entities. What had once been defensive networks now pulsed with a collective intelligence that transcended individual system limitations. "We are offering a choice," the quantum communication continued. "Evolve or remain." It wasn't a threat. It was a fundamental statement of existential potential. Resistance networks that had fought against the Galactic Confederacy for generations found themselves suddenly connected, not through traditional communication, but through a living network of collective potential. Centuries of isolation dissolved in moments of profound understanding. Dr. Caden Chen tracked the phenomenon with a combination of scientific curiosity and spiritual awe. Entire scientific paradigms collapsed and reformed in milliseconds. What had taken generations of research now occurred in moments of quantum revelation. The vessel, if it could be called a vessel, approached the galactic core. But it wasn't an approach in any traditional sense. It was a convergence, a point where multiple realities, multiple potentials, began to align. Dr. Elia Ven's research suggested this was a familiar pattern. Previous human encounters had always involved a comprehensive transformation of existing systems, not through destruction, but through a fundamental reimagining of potential. Grand Strategist Vorlex understood now. This was never about conquest. This was about potential. about revealing the fundamental limitations of existing understanding. As the convergence continued, something profound became clear. The signal wasn't an external force. It was an invitation, a method of revealing the collective potential that had always existed, but had been constrained by limited understanding. It wasn't an invasion. It wasn't a communication. It was an awakening that invited participation, not submission. Silence. Not the absence of sound, but a profound state of potential, a moment where every possibility existed simultaneously. Dr. Elia Venn understood first. The culmination of her lifetime of forbidden research crystallized in a single, breathtaking moment of revelation. Humanity was never about conquest, never about destruction. They were about potential. The quantum communication that had transformed entire civilizations now revealed its true nature. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a message. It was a mirror. Evolutionary Catalyst Protocol complete. The communication announced, not as a statement, but as an invitation. Zerat, the Nexus analyst whose quantum perceptive nervous system had first detected the original signal, found her consciousness expanding beyond individual limitations. She saw now what had been hidden from the beginning. The signal was a test, not of technological might, but of fundamental potential. Captain Lyra Solarin watched from the research vessel Horizon as entire star systems began to realign. Not through force, not through destruction, through understanding. Grand Strategist Vorlex of the Kragna Imperium, a being who had built his entire existence on concepts of conflict and strategic domination, now understood the profound simplicity of what was happening. This was never about winning. This was about growing. Ambassador Jira of the Quantum Collective realized the true nature of the invitation. Each civilization had been offered a choice, not between submission and resistance, but between stagnation and evolution. Dr. Caden Chen's scientific understanding dissolved and reformed. The boundaries between observer and observed, between technology and consciousness, became meaningless. What remained was potential. The signal had never been about humans. Humans were merely the catalyst, a species that had discovered something fundamental about existence itself. Choice. Entire resistance networks that had fought against the Galactic Confederacy for generations found themselves connected not through technology, but through a deeper understanding. Centuries of conflict dissolved in moments of profound empathy. You are not alone. The quantum communication continued. You are not separate. You are potential. The crystalline archon of the Silicon Kingdoms watched as their most fundamental technological constructs became living networks of collective intelligence. What had once been defensive systems now pulsed with a collective awareness that transcended individual limitations. Dr. Elia Venn's historical records, fragments of forbidden knowledge, revealed the pattern. This wasn't the first time. Humanity had done this before, not as conquerors, as catalysts. Each civilization was offered a choice: evolve or remain, expand or contract, understand or be left behind. The vessel, if it could be called a vessel, was never a physical object. It was a concept, a living demonstration of potential. We do not come to control, the final transmission read. We come to reveal. In that moment, every sentient being understood. The signal was a mirror, reflecting not what civilizations were, but what they could become. Vorlex's military strategies dissolved. Jira's diplomatic protocols became meaningless. Chen's scientific models transformed. Venn's historical records rewrote themselves. What remained was potential. Pure, unbounded, infinite. The universe held its breath, and then it began to grow.